well, thank you very much. Thank you for the honor of chairing this panel. I'll just say very briefly, I can remember, I don't know how many years ago it was. I might have been even in graduate school, which I don't want to say how long ago it was because I can't calculate. But my professor, Leonard Binder, the late Leonard Binder, was talking somehow about the Israel-Palestine question, and he says, everybody knows what the solution is. You know, the bridal canopy is prepared, but where are the bride and groom? And I mean, that's a kind of equivalence, which is not really fair in this situation. But a more extreme version of that is what Raja said in his article in The Guardian earlier in the week, which is, the question is not, before we can even start talking about which political settlement, you know, 1 state, 2 states, however many states, after this past year, it's just very difficult to visualize any solution. It's easy to show, and this is the pattern that most of the debate takes. It's easy, if you're an advocate of the 2-state solution, it's easy to show that the 1-state solution is impossible. And if you're an advocate of the 1-state solution, it's easy to show that the 2-state solution is impossible. So I don't mean to just start with despair, but I think this is a really serious question. We see the degree to which Israeli society has dehumanized Palestinians and seems to be almost unconscious of what they are doing to their neighbors, and the degree to which Palestinian society is just being torn apart by the occupation and war, and the seeming eagerness of the Israeli government, backed by the complicity or complacency of the United States, to start to turn this into a major regional conflict, which might start with Israel and Iran, but who knows where it might end. So I'm afraid, you know, it's good to start off on a discussion like this with something constructive to say, but I don't really know how to say something constructive at this point. So except that at least we are sitting down together and trying to think about it. And we have someone, Raja Shehadeh, who has very eloquently outlined, I think, the problem as it is now. And so let me turn it over to him for the first intervention.
Well, thank you for this. I will start. As I prepare these notes, I can hear Israeli warplanes flying overhead on their way to bomb Gaza and Lebanon. The war that Israel is engaged in is not yet over. Much will depend on how it ends and on what effect this will have on relations between Israel and the US. Another crucial factor to consider is how the latest phase of the struggle will come to be perceived by the Israeli public. Would they continue to believe in war rather than in peace as the best guarantor for their future? It's too early to predict, but usually wars can bring in their wake big changes. In considering future political solutions, I believe it is important to distinguish between what is desirable in the long term and what is possible in the short term. I believe that that 1 state where the 2 nations, Israeli and Palestinian, live together is what the long-term future will hold. Even more, a single union of a sort that will encompass all the states in the Levant, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon is the best way of combating the impending scarcity of resources and bringing about, in the long term, real peace to the region. But this most desirable outcome cannot happen yet. It will have to be preceded first by realizing self-determination for the Palestinians and the creation of a Palestinian state next to the Israeli state. I say this for the following reasons. 1, our greatest asset and strength as Palestinians is that international law is on our side, whether in the presence of the yet unimplemented UN Partition Resolution 181, and Resolution 194 regarding the Palestinian right of return, or more recently, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice at The Hague on July 19. This declared inter alia that the Israeli occupation is illegal and called for the dismantling of all the settlements and transfer of all the settlers living there into Israel. In any future negotiations, we have to insist on implementation of all these resolutions and opinions. This vital legal asset will be wasted if we advocate a one-state solution now. Second, much political work has been done to promote a two-state solution. This renders it the outcome that has the greatest support, be it only verbal at this point, among the nations of the world, including the US and the EU. Third, the war and the destruction of Gaza and the grave violations of human rights in the West Bank has caused much bad blood between the two nations, making relations between them far worse than ever before, and raising the question of how can we Palestinians live together with the Israelis. Placing both people in one state after all this that has happened in Gaza and the West Bank is unrealistic. To my mind, a period of separation will be essential before the two sides can live together. And finally, 4, the level of development of both societies as far as political experience and statecraft matters are concerned is so vast that we Palestinians will need a time to catch up before we can live together with the Israelis under one roof. For all these reasons, I believe that the realistic future solution for now that we should advocate is two states, a Palestinian state with Eastern Jerusalem as its capital next to the Israeli state. This is what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. And of course, you'll focus partly on the international consensus, and this is certainly a conflict where it doesn't seem, it's obvious that the parties to the conflict will not settle it themselves. They have to be persuaded and forced to by others. And the international community has agreed, for better or worse, on this two-state solution as at least the transitional method.
Absolutely.
Of course, we all know what the, sorry?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. We all know the major obstacle to that, which is the armed settler movement in the occupied territories. But I won't go any more into that right now. Let me ask Alon-Lee to present his remarks.
Good evening here in Israel, Palestine, and thank you for organizing it and having us. I would say that, of course, a person at this moment that wants to see the region, the land, the people that live on it advance and move away from this horrific and tragic and bloody moment should support independence for the Palestinians, should support freedom and liberation and equality and independence to all the Palestinians that live on the land. There's no question about it. And I think it must go through an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel as a first stage. Afterwards, I have a lot of dreams. I have a lot of visions to how this region, how this land can prosper and benefit all the people that live on it. But right now, and I think this is my main point that I would like to present, is right now we need to ask the question, not only what is our fantasy, not only what is this desired place to reach, but how are we going to do so? What is the ability to move further away from this terrible place that we are right now? And I think that it requires to speak, first of all, of a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire right now, stopping the killing, stopping the destruction, stopping the starvation, stopping the diseases, stopping the bombing of millions of people living in Gaza, living in Lebanon, and yes, also living in Israel. We need to remember that there are a lot of citizens in Israel living under direct missiles as well. This is a first necessary step. And then we need to say that a solution is needed, a solution that we can align the political forces, the political leadership of both Israel and the Palestinians behind. I think this solution must consist of freedom, equality, and independence to all the people that live on the land. And this is the only way to also provide safety and security to both Israelis and Palestinians. So I think those three things, freedom, equality, and independence, are the things that we need to demand in any political solution, though understanding that it might not mean that we achieve the full justice in the first few steps of the solution. Maybe there will be some issues that we will need to continue fight for in order to achieve the complete justice, but we need to be able to move forward. And I think that it is not our role to draw lines on a map and say it should go here or there. Our role as a grassroots Jewish Palestinian movement within Israel is to build the political will and the political majority within our society for ending the occupation, ending the bloodshed, ending the war. And if the political leadership of both Palestine and Israel will agree on a specific solution that will be agreed upon the people, who are we to say, no, the line should not be here, it needs to be here? As long as all the people are free, equal, and independent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. One point which we haven't addressed so far, which of course, I guess we will get to later at some point, but I just wanted to raise it now, is of course the role of the United States, which has from the foundation of the State of Israel played a very important role, perhaps even eclipsing the parties to the conflict in its influence. But I'll get back to that later. Okay, Leila Farsakh, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you also for the two previous interventions. I think the point that was raised by Raja and by Alon were very important. One, what is realistic and desirable versus how do we do it on the ground? And I think I will try to address that, but I will start by saying that it's very important to understand what is so particular and about the second Nakba. This genocidal war of Israel against the Palestinians has really brought us to a very new historical reality that is as cataclysmic as the 1948 Nakba. I mean, there are important differences because the Nakba of 1948 was devastating, of course, destroyed Palestine, eliminated the existence of Palestine. But the magnitude of death and destruction that has happened with this second Nakba is far more devastating, as everybody knows. We know we have 42,000 people who have been killed, 1.8 million displaced, and we have a situation which requires, as was said, the first step is a ceasefire. But just as the 1948 creation of State of Israel and the Nakba completely changed the map of the Middle East in ways we did not imagine in 48. Just think 4 years after the Nakba, we had a coup in Egypt, we have all the Arab regime have changed, the map of the Middle East changed. Now, we don't know how we are witnessing history in its more horrific aspects. We don't know yet where the dice will end once this is over. But we know today that the Arab states are much stronger and the region is very different than what it was in 1948 or 1950. But the repercussions of this war on a new generation, on what people are witnessing in the Arab streets, in Israel, outside Israel, in the world, is going to be very important. And the question will be, what will be its impact on policymakers, on the US administration, on Iran, on how the whole region will change or not. But with regards to Israel-Palestine, I think 2 points are very important. I think we should not forget now that Palestinian right to self-determination has been recognized by everybody except Israel. I mean, the Palestinian state is already recognized by 139 states. The two-state solution has been tried and failed because Israel is not interested in it and the international community has not put any pressure on Israel to actually implement it. So while I see the point by Raja that the only realistic solution is a two-state solution, I actually do not see this as possibly can happen for the simple fact that now we have 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, the majority of which were transferred after the Oslo peace process, and they are not likely to move. So actually drawing the borders is going to become incredibly impossible. And secondly, after this war, it has become very clear if for 30 years the Palestinians thought there is a way to live with Zionism, there is a way to abstract Zionism, there is a way to not deal with it. With this war, it became very clear that Zionism cannot accommodate the Palestinians. Zionism with this war has proven that it wants to eliminate the Palestinians. So how do we deal with that? We need to go into a discourse of decolonization. And this doesn't mean that this is a question of eliminating the Israeli people, definitely not. In any present or any ceasefire, and any one state or two-state solution will require recognizing that Israelis live there and they call this home, that this land has 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews, that for all intended purpose, what they have is an apartheid state. And the only way how you can remove or end this apartheid state is unfortunately no longer the two-state solution, because nobody's going to put pressure on Israel to retreat to the 1967 border, to have East Jerusalem as capital. So what this tells us is that de facto, anybody realist who wants to implement a two-state solution will be talking about a confederation. Because a confederation is the only way by which you acknowledge the existence of a Palestinian state, which internationally has been recognized, but Israel did not recognize it. The reality of an Israeli state, which is recognized by the Palestinians as well. Only a confederate state will leave the settlers where they are and will not need drawing borders. And a confederal state will mean that you're going to have two states that have their local parliaments there, and they're going to have a confederate system or a federal system that would deal with foreign affairs and defense. So I think that the stumbling block we are in now is that we need, as Palestinians, I think, and anybody who looks at the fact, admit that the two-state solution served its purpose and its part has passed. It served to prove that the Palestinians exist, that they have political rights, that international law is on their side. But now, also with this war, international law has been under a major crisis. We've seen the limitation of international law and how it can help, but also is very limited and is being called into question. We are at a juncture where we can move on and produce something more egalitarian, realistic in terms of a confederation, or more egalitarian in the sense of we need to dismantle Zionism without giving away the right of Israelis and Jews to live in Palestine. How we're going to do that, I think, is going to depend a little bit on pressure, a lot on pressure on Israel. That's where the role of the US becomes very important. The role of the EU becomes very important. Sanctions become very important. Boycotts become very important. But also, we need to move beyond the two-state solution by talking about precisely what Alon mentioned, the fact that we need to emphasize equality for all, and the fact that Zionism is the Zionism that won, the Zionism that is in power, is a destructive, genocidal ideology, and that we need to pursue a policy of decolonization. So the form of the one state can take various shape, but talking about two state is delusional and is just gonna go nowhere, because also we're having a new generation that thinks in completely different terms and are very much emphasize the importance of equality, of dignity, and of decolonization. So I'll stop at that.
Well, thank you very much for that. That has illustrated the point that I made, which is that it's easy to prove that either solution is impossible. But the challenge is in thinking about how to do something, however it's structured. Now I'll turn to Helena to comment on that.
Well, hello, everybody. Hello, Bonnie Rubin. Hello, Boston Review. Thanks for organizing this. It's I've published 2 pieces in Boston Review since October 7th of last year. One was about Hamas, and the other was about the global, the serious shifts in the global balance of power that actually preceded October 7th. So just before I get into, I really want to take on the international aspects of this. But before I do, I want to just give a shout out to the book that came out this week on October 8th called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. It's co-authored by me and Rami Khouri. And it's in essence a powerful plea for diplomacy and smart diplomacy rather than continued reliance on militarism. But now let's go to the international dimensions, because they are massive. And I honestly, sitting here with, colleagues who are respected and beloved, listening to people try to kind of pass the virtues of a one state versus two state approach is kind of like listening to people trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, honestly, because the Titanic is much, much larger at a global level. I'm mixing my metaphors horribly here, but I think we can all understand that there is huge change in the global system right now. And this change has been going on for quite a long time. It has massive repercussions for West Asia, the part of the world that previously has often been known in the Eurocentric term of the Middle East, but I am not a Eurocentricist. So these changes include, well, at fundament, they are a serious erosion in the ability of the United States to continue to exercise hegemony over the global system, such as it has exercised since the end of the Cold War. So that's a kind of a 32, 34-year period of US hegemony, and it's coming crashing to an end. And this end is being hastened by the outrageous actions of Washington's Rottweiler in West Asia, otherwise known as the Israeli military industrial machine, which, I've been trying to understand the relationship between Israel and US militarism for many decades now. And I think the metaphor of a Rottweiler is the important one. It's the one that works. It's a kind of a dog that you train to do vicious things, but you hope to keep it under control. And then suddenly the Rottweiler is no longer under control and is harming your own interests from the point of view of the United States. And this has brought us to a crisis. These repeated provocations that this Israeli government has undertaken, not just the genocide since October 8th of last year, but also a series of provocations, including, the killing of the IRGC people in Damascus back in early April, the killing of Fuad Shukr and Ismail Haniyeh. They're just poking at the opponents with the idea of escalating the situation so that Uncle Sam will have to come in and save them, because actually none of these actions could ever have been taken without Uncle Sam's without Uncle Sam continuing to send weapons and to provide an ironclad protection for Israel and its militarism at the United Nations. So, Washington has been dragged into this, but right now, with the prospect of an outright war between Israel and Iran, we are in a completely new ballgame. And we see the international system that we have known for, since 1945, essentially, perched on a precipice. The international system has been in crisis for a long time, but over the past year, we've seen the Israelis kill UN staff members with impunity. We've seen the Israeli ambassador at the UN treat the international organization with contempt and suffer no bad consequences whatsoever. The actions of Israel have brought the international system that we've known since 1945 to the precipice. And so all the resolutions that Raja has talked about, 242 and 338, the whole concept. All that is currently up in the air, honestly, as is the continued existence of the settler colonial state of Israel itself. I mean, there are people in the Israeli government who say they want it to extend its boundaries into large chunks of Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. People in the government there. At the same time, they are quite unable to think of a political endgame, even for tiny Gaza. It's just a military machine gone wild at a time when, I mean, I'm sure Alon-Lee has experienced this, that Jewish Israeli public has lurched to the right. I mean, it's obviously been moving steadily to the right since Menachem Begin's victory in 1977, but in the past year, it has lurched to the right. And paradoxically, Jewish American society, in generational terms, has been moving to the left, which is interesting to me. But just to sum up the international crisis, I think it's not important only to look at what's happening, you know, in Israeli-Palestinian politics. It's not only important to look at what's happening in region-wide politics in West Asia, although there is a lot of interesting things happening, including the fact that the president of Iran just a week ago visited Qatar and had a good meeting with the Saudi foreign minister as part of this reconciliation, rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia that was brokered by the Chinese last year, to the amazement of the Americans, who had no idea that this was happening. So I think everything is up in the air right now. There is, of course, this whole raft of UN resolutions, not just 242 and 338, but more recently, the wonderful UN General Assembly resolution that builds on the ICJ determination that Israel's occupation of the territories occupied in 1967 is completely illegal, needs to be reversed, and Israel needs to pay reparation to the harmed Palestinians. That was an amazing General Assembly resolution that passed with the overwhelming support of the majority of humankind. Now, we have gotten used to thinking that the US in some way represents humankind. That is not the case at all. The US is a tiny portion of humankind. And I don't know if the global majority will be able to come forward and actually implement any of these UN resolutions without confronting American power. So this is really a serious question for us as who are American citizens to be able to deal with our role, not just as a supporter of Israel, not just as an enabler and supporter of the genocide that is that is going on in Gaza, but also as our government blocking the demands of the global majority for a new and more equitable world order that will inevitably have great impact on the people of Israel and Palestine.
Well, thank you. I see that Shlomo has joined us, or had joined us. Now he's wandered off the screen. So I could say something, but well, perhaps he's not there to be recognized. Let me say something, speaking from the United States, being an American, Jewish American, to say something about the role of the United States and also Iran. First, the United States has two big roles in the Middle East, at least right now, one of which is as the guarantor and supplier of Israel and its military, of course, backed up by the veto in the UN Security Council. But the other is that many of the Sunni Arab states, I don't know what you want to call them, conservative, reactionary, authoritarian, anyway, are looking to the United States as a counterweight toward Iran. So that, and I have been surprised, I have been going around that area quite a bit, mainly because of my work on Afghanistan, which means that I have a somewhat different relationship with all of the parties. I can talk to the Saudis, I can talk to the Iranians. The willingness of some Saudis, some Sunni Arabs to, in power, not as far as I can see the masses, to actually tolerate really terrifying behavior by Israel because of what they see as the Iranian threat, is something that makes it even harder to overcome. Now, in terms of the United States, see, the political situation is we have one political party which has been captured as the Republicans. On this issue has been completely captured by the right-wing Christian evangelicals. That is the neoconservatives, who were many of them Jewish, are no longer in the Republican Party by and large. They have abandoned Trump, even if their position on Israel and Palestine is equally aggressive as before. And the evangelicals, they think they know everything about the land of Israel because they read the Bible. And, if you look at some of the congressional hearings, that's how they are talking. The Democratic Party is hardly in a position. Sorry. Someone trying to speak. Right. The Democratic Party has a coalition that is held together over domestic issues. What's happening now? A coalition that's held together by domestic issues, and as I guess as Helena has said, there is increasing polarization within the Democratic coalition, especially by generation. But that polarization on this issue is potentially damaging to the coalition on the domestic issues, so that there's great hesitation about bringing it out. And there's always a possibility that the Democratic Party might be fragmented like the Republican Party has become. That is, let me put it this way, there is no reliable political base in the United States for supporting Palestinian freedom that I can see. There is a growing popular movement, but the two political parties are and the security apparatus, neither of them are really movable on that. So I think that we have to have a strategy for moving the United States as well, or we're not going to get anywhere. And then I would just add about Iran. I happen to know a lot of the people who are in power in Iran now, and I didn't know the people who were in power in Iran before. My view is they're very reasonable, even humane people who are caught in a terrible situation, but they also are relatively powerless compared to the power holders in their society. But trying to lessen the demonization of Iran and the United States, and perhaps eventually, when it deserves it, of the United States and Iran, would also be key to trying to create an environment in which we can even think about some kind of a settlement. I'm sorry, that's perhaps not very helpful remarks. But let me ask a question. I wonder, just based on what I said, how let me start with Raja, how you view the political disputes or lack thereof over this issue in the United States. Do you see a way to engage with it? Do you see a way that it could deliver anything?
Well, I think that at this point, Israel is holding the United States hostage because of the elections. And Israel knows that as long as the elections have not happened, they have a free hand, because neither party can rule or give any opposition against Israel at this point, because they will lose the elections. And so it's a very special time and peculiar time, which we must not assume will last beyond the elections. I wonder how the United States will feel about the treatment of Israel to, for example, Biden, who has been humiliated again and again by Israel, and the position of the United States in the world has been lowered because of the Israeli reaction and the Israeli behavior. So will these matters have any effect on the United States and on the politics? I think we must assume that they might have a little bit of an effect, and that will make some difference in the positions of the United States towards this conflict.
Okay, Alon, you want to comment on that?
I honestly, after one full year of this continuous killing and terrible reality, looking at the US, understanding that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the entire Israeli state is able to, in Hebrew we say, spin around the little finger, but spin the American administration around the little finger, seeing that
twist, same thing.
Twist, seeing that there's no red line that is not crossed by Netanyahu again and again and again, meaning there's no red lines at all. It is completely discouraging, because we are witnessing our genocidal, with many intents, government, people that are calling openly to kill innocent people, people that are trying to tell our society that there are no innocent people in Gaza, people that are talking about nuking Gaza, and it was said by a minister in Israel. We're seeing them winning. And we need to remember that the majority of Israelis do not support this government. If there will be elections held right now, this government will be voted out. It does not mean that all the voters will vote in favor of Palestinian rights or in favor of, even ending the occupation. We can talk about the Israeli society and the trends inside, but it is completely discouraging. Every Israeli sane person right now, and we have a lot of us, to see the smile upon the faces of Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir while they are dealing with the Americans, because the Americans are not able at the moment to hold any kind of a spine. And I'm trying to be delicate in the way I'm talking about it. And I think the real people in the US that care about Israelis really need to ask themselves, what does it really mean to be a good friend of the Israeli people? Does it mean giving a blank check to the Israeli government, allowing them and us to do what we want, to assassinate who we want, wherever we want, and to be killing so many people? Or maybe it does not serve the interests of the Israeli people. Maybe the real safety of the Israeli people will only be achieved when we will not military control over millions of people that are not the citizens of our country, but are controlled violently, and therefore resist this occupation and control. Because my life as a Jewish person in Israel, my family, my society cannot be safe in this reality. We cannot be safe. And if people there in the US are telling themselves that they are somehow serving our interests, they are delusional and they're lying to themselves and to the public. And I think this is a moment that we need to demand real actions in order to save the two people that live here on this land, to achieve freedom to the Palestinians, but in the same time achieve safety to the Jewish Israelis. Because there are 7 million Palestinians living on this land, and they are going nowhere, despite of the fantasies of the extreme Messianic right wing in Israel. But there are also 7 million Jewish people live on the same land, and they are going nowhere. By the way, despite of the fantasies of some parts of the political system, even of the left sometimes, they are going nowhere. And the only way to move forward and to achieve some kind of existence is by allowing both people to live in freedom and independence and equality. This means safety. And the role of the US administration is just absurd at this moment, but we are afraid to know or to find out what will happen if Trump will be reelected. I think one thing that we learned for sure in this very traumatic year is that we are in a free fall. Whenever you think you hit the bottom, it is not the bottom. You keep on falling. There are many bottoms that are waiting you down the road, and it's scary. You feel like there's nothing to hold onto. You keep on falling and falling and falling and discovering more and more realities that are even worse. You know, think of this from the Israeli angle. Do you think we could anticipate on October 8th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 1 year from today, that in a year from last year, we will be facing rockets from 5 different countries in the same week, having 12 citizens killed by either attacks, stabbing attacks, fire attacks in the streets of Jaffa or Hedera, by Palestinians, some of them citizens of Israel, some of them from the West Bank, some people dying from rockets that are falling on their head. And this is the reality that is the new reality we're facing. We could not believe a person that would tell us that this is going to be a reality. So 1 year after this war started, our reality is worse. And if someone thinks that they are helping us with giving these black tanks, with giving these offensive weapons to Israel, the news that we have for them is that we are worse right now, not better.
Well, that's a very, very interesting point that I think hasn't gotten enough attention, because of course the primary goal of Zionism originally was not to control territory in the Levant, but to provide a safe haven for the Jewish people. And today there is no place in the world that is more dangerous for the Jewish people than the state of Israel. So that in itself is a complete failure of the Zionist project, which will have to be confronted sooner or later. Let me add one other point someone might want to comment on. I think someone did, maybe Leila mentioned this. Of course, this idea of the rules-based order, or Helena mentioned post-1945, all these international agreements. Now, of course, there never was a rules-based order, and there's always been a lot of hypocrisy surrounding it, and double standards and triple standards and so on. But it seems that, just to reuse a phrase, that the bottom has really dropped out of it in the course of the past year. That is, the amount of vast hypocrisy on display has just made it, that was supposed to be the alternative to violence. The UN was supposed to end the scourge of war. And in addition to, so this goes far beyond just this region. We'll have to think about how to redesign the international system so that it can still go back to trying to prevent rather than promote war. Leila, you want to say anything?
I think maybe
Yeah.
Helena can say more.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you're quite right, Barney, that obviously the international system is in crisis. It doesn't just need a reform right now. That's one thing. And when you say we need to think about it, I just want to know who is the we. The we should not be just Americans and pro-Americans around the world, because we Americans and pro-Americans, let's call it the white empire for what it is, are a minority. I mean, people of West European or white settler colonial citizenships constitute roughly 12% of humankind at this point, which is the same percentage, more or less, that white people in South Africa formed of the South African population during the apartheid era and possibly today, although a lot of them have left. So I think if we have a sincere and radical commitment to the equality of all human persons, then we need to be very, very humble as citizens of the white empire in the face of the fact that, you know, the global majority doesn't buy anymore all the hypocrisy that American leaders have been spewing out for a long time about the rules-based order, about the you know, the mission civilisatrice of America, about America as the city on the hill. And we need to listen to the people from the global south, or the global majority more generally. I just want to come back on the particular point where somebody said that nothing can be done during a US election period. You know, I grew up in England in the 1950s, and at that time, my government, I was still but a wee child, of course, but, you know, I remember the planes taking off from the local airbase to go and bomb Egypt during the Suez Crisis. And, you know, the British and French and the Israelis all thought that they had some kind of a right to undertake this action, the goal of which was to topple Jamal Abdel Nasser. So who stepped in and stopped that from happening? President Eisenhower. And how did he do it? He didn't send in bombers. He didn't, you know, he didn't do anything militarily. He pulled the plug on the British pound sterling and on the French franc. And both the British and French, and with a little bit of delay, the Israelis all withdrew from Sinai and from the banks of the Suez Canal. So that is one potent example of how the states of the global majority might seek to rein in American power today. Although, of course, there are a lot of other issues, but you know, if you look at the decline in American soft power globally, especially over the past 12 months of its ironclad support for Netanyahu's genocide, or the Israeli genocide, the Israeli military machine's genocide. If you look at the decline in US ability to influence people, if you look at the rise of the BRICS and other representatives of the global majority and their increasing role in the international economy, like the GDP of the BRICS countries actually exceeded the GDP of the G7 countries a few years ago. So it's no longer the case that the United States can unilaterally, you know, run the world. So I'm making a potent plea for true human equality. And however the people in the global majority choose to structure the United Nations, choose to structure such things that we've taken for granted, like, you know, the partition plan for Palestine of 1947, or the state system of West Asia in general, you know, that was imposed at the end of the First World War. Things may change very, very radically. And, you know, Barney, you talked a little bit about the Sunni Arab leaders and, you know, regime type thinkers that you talk to, who would be very happy to see Iran contained. Honestly, I think that is a little bit out of date as kind of data points, because if Pezeshkian is visiting Qatar, which remember is a hotbed of Sunni Muslim fundamentalism, and receiving the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and they are reaching an agreement that the GCC countries will not be a party to attempt to overthrow the regime in Iran. We are talking about a very radically different West Asia than the one that existed even 2 years ago.
Well, I was thinking that, but I had a very unsettling conversation with a Saudi the other day, but I won't go into that now. Now, I want to remind the attendees that there is a question and answer space down at the bottom of your screen. We haven't gotten too many yet, but I've been looking at them, and I think they illustrate the way that the discourse about these issues in the United States is so different from the discourse that those of us on the panel have, and that most of the people in the world have. I don't know who else can see this. One person just said, Helena's white empire racial routine is wearisome and useless. Global South, global majority. Does that mean listening to Ayatollahs, the ANC? That's the same thing, apparently. Modi or the Pakistanis, or perhaps Xi Jinping or Venezuela. Then someone else whose question is listed as dismissed, I'm not sure, was saying, first time the word hostage has been used is about the United States being hostage to Israel. And what about the hostages that Hamas is holding in Gaza? I won't try to answer that. And another point, which has more to do with the situation in intellectual and academic cultural centers in the United States, which is what do you think of artists and cultural people refusing to associate with people in festivals because they believe they are Zionists and so on? So as you see, these questions are none of them about the situation on the ground, except for the hostages. I might add that if the Israeli government showed more concern about the hostages, then that might help raise the profile of the issue internationally. But so far, they have not made that. Nothing indicates that that really is a priority for them. But I just wonder, and we're about to hear much more of this as the academic year starts again, and we have demonstrations again. So I'm just wondering how we how to deal with that huge polarization in global discourses. You might say one way of looking at it is between those people for whom the history of the last 500 years is of colonial oppression and those for whom it's of Western development and development of democracy. Those are two totally different narratives of what has been happening in the last few centuries.
But the gap between them has diminished, and it's a reflection of power, right? It's these two narratives. It's not that two equal narratives. I mean, 100 years ago, the narrative of the people who are calling for being decolonized did not have the power, were considered marginalized, and needed to be civilized. There was a whole discourse of civilization that we thought by the 1980s has dwindled, and I think on the universities has weakened. We do believe, and I think one of the reasons why the assault on universities for all the activism pro-Palestine, Gaza was used as a Trojan horse to silence all discussion of diversity and inclusion. So there is always a struggle of power over what is the discourse and who has right to have rights and who doesn't. So, I mean, of course, the question that was posed about the hostages, is somebody concerned about why aren't we not centralizing the hostages? And you answered it very brilliantly. The state of Israel is not caring about its hostages. But I think we cannot undermine the fact that we are witnessing a certain geostrategic global and regional change. On the global level, yeah, the US is still important, but China is very important. And the war in Ukraine is showing that Russia is not going anywhere. Regionally, we are seeing a certain, consideration of changing alliances, which the US is also concerned about. Now, how will we move forward? I think we cannot avoid the ethical question. What do you believe is right, and what do you believe? Do you believe in equality or you believe in superiority? Do you believe in, and is your discourse of superiority camouflaged in an argument of democratization or not? This doesn't mean that those who are talking about decolonization are more democratic. No, I think it goes back always to the question of principles and the questions of institutions that can support or undermine democracy, institutions and systems that can undermine or support accountability. And what we see right now is that the global system that was set by European countries in the Second World War proved to be double standards, to have a double standard, and is being held accountable by the majority of the people. Now, will they succeed? This is a question of always, power. But I think this is a moment calling on us, all of us, and we saw that with the students' mobilization in the United States, which has been unprecedented. And it's not a coincidence that it happened, because it happens after the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters. It's an indication of a new generation emerging, like during the Vietnam War, saying we have different aspiration, we have different understanding of the world, we believe in justice, we believe in equality, and also we worry about the environment, and everything is interconnected, So the question is, how will this generation manifest itself politically with power? That's what we still do not know, and this is why we also know why the attack on the university right now is so fierce, because universities stopped being universities and became corporations. So in these struggles over who has power and who gets to define the debate, we are at a juncture where there is a serious fight over it. And we do not know how it will be concluded. But I think anybody who believes in equality and believes in ethics has to take a stand to make sure that we don't go towards a more authoritarian world, which, you could say China and Russia are for, of course, and Saudi Arabia and Iran and all those. But also America can risk go that direction if we don't hold it accountable.
Well, thank you. I'm looking at some more questions are coming in, and most of them are coming in from what I would call sort of mainstream U.S. opinion. No one is responding to the question, Leila, that you raised about equality. Someone says that any viable solution, someone named Alex Rose, must include a way for Israelis to be protected from future attacks by Hamas and Hezbollah. Of course, that is true. Also,
Palestinians have to be
include a way
protected.
for Palestinians
Of course.
to be protected from settler violence, which is much vaster than anything that the Palestinians have been able to do. But that doesn't.
So Alon-Lee has his hand up.
Sorry. Sorry.
Alon-Lee has.
Alon-Lee
has. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Go ahead. Alon-Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to maybe touch upon the question of the universities, and I think it's an interesting point Leila has raised about the Vietnamese War. And I'm trying to imagine if in the US, in this dire decade of the Vietnamese War, the movement will only be of ones going out to the streets saying, I support the Viet Cong, I support Marxism-Leninism, I read Mao and I support all the very strong part of the ideological movement, and that's the reason I oppose the Vietnamese War. And whomever that is have the idea of fighting for their self-interest because soldiers come back in coffins to the US, they are not part of my movement. I reject them. I don't cooperate with them. I want my movement to be pure. I think it will not be a winning movement. And the war in Vietnam will not end. And I think we need to learn these lessons and to ask ourselves right now, in this historic moment of 42,000 people already dead in Gaza, 15,000 of them being children. When we don't have an end in sight, and the war spreads to Lebanon as well, Iran is in the picture. There are so many fronts that can be, joining this. We need to ask ourselves, what is our ability to build the most powerful front, the most powerful coalition? And what I'm worried about is when I see that people are defining the movement by terminology, statements, and words instead of power. And I think it is counterproductive to see that in so many parts of the discussion, the self-identification of yourself, the way you choose to describe yourself, is more important than your actions, than your desire to be joining the movement against the war or against the occupation. I think, for example, that we do not have a privilege in Israel to tell a person if they're Zionist and they're against the occupation and the war, no, I'm not going to cooperate with you. No, welcome to the fight. Let's fight together. Let's build more power. And I am extremely worried when I see the direction of the, inability to imagine how we are also cooperating in order to stop what is going right now in the name of the pure justice that we're fighting for in the end of the world. So I think we need to really ask ourselves, when the school year starts, when we're entering the second year of this reality, we need to ask ourselves, are we fighting right now to end this war, to end the occupation, to achieve freedom and safety and equality and liberation to the Palestinians, but also for the Israelis? Or the fight is for the pure thing that we can, condemn and shout on reality, and this is on the expense of changing reality. And I choose right now to be in the side of stopping this reality and changing this reality. And yes, it means I need to build coalitions. It means I need to cooperate with people that do not think like me. And what I see abroad in the discussion of the international left keeps me very worried.
Well, I'd like to add that part of the reason you see that is because those remarks are magnified by people who are trying to discredit the movement. Magnified and misinterpreted.
Exactly.
I'm sure, and it is something that we experience here. Of course, people call us traitors. They try to kill us because of our opinions sometimes here. I understand that. But still, I get the criticism. I can write a post, for example, in my Instagram or in our Instagram in English or in Hebrew or Arabic, and a lot of people will write me, you're talking about peace? There will be no peace until the complete justice. And I'm telling them, are we expected to keep on killing each other until we get there? The answer is that we need to be able to make people understand that they will also benefit something out of this. Israelis need to understand that it is with their self-interest to end the war and the occupation, but also the movement needs to consider the self-interest of Israelis in this fight, because not all Israelis are going to become standing in solidarity with the Palestinians just one morning because they understood that the Palestinians are the ultimate victims, which they are. So we need to be able to build the movement also upon the mutual shared interest of both Palestinians and Israelis. Ignoring this is not a very wise thing.
Well, this goes back to the question that you have to have the fundamentals, right? Do you believe in the equality of everyone or you don't? I think that's a very important thing. Do you believe that there, as you said, there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians are not going anywhere? Do you believe in that equality in full sense? But you also cannot forget that there is a structure and there is a state which is oppressive. So that's what people are trying to get out. Now, of course, as what's been said is that you have some people in the left trying to hijack for other reasons, and this has always happened historically. But I think we should not, and also there is also a Zionist or state propaganda trying to discredit every talk about equality and about cooperation or collaboration or about justice. Okay, so I think we have to be careful not to fall in that trap, because again, any liberatory project is a liberator for Palestinians and Israelis. I was trying to present though that we came to a point where Zionism became a very important issue, which before we thought we can abstract. And what gets triggered in this discussion is that Zionism is both for the Israelis a project of national liberation or salvation, but it is still fundamentally a colonial project. So the big challenge is how you're going to work with that. When somebody is being anti-Zionist, he's not necessarily being anti-Israeli. He's not negating the right of Israelis in Israel, in Palestine to live. Okay, the question is, how do you do it? So I think that, but this is a very important question, because we came to this crux at this moment, which was for 30 years, we tried to avoid. Also process was all based on the fact that you can avoid this question. And this war, this level of action is a proof that Zionism, that one is not possible, cannot accommodate the Palestinian. And I understand this for the Israelis is very scary. But for the Palestinian, for the international community, it became clear. So it becomes a question of power. Do you understand? And this is where we're challenging the power versus the ethics, the equality. But I think the readers need to understand these differences, because we're struggling with it. But thank you for what you said, because
Yeah, I think it's really important to bear in mind what both of you have said. I just want to throw in something from the work that I did on the transition in South Africa. This was part of a book that I published in 2006 on how you deal with the aftermath of atrocious violence. And, when I was doing my research in South Africa in the early aughts, it was impossible to find any white South African who confessed to ever having supported apartheid. You know, how on earth did the apartheid system last for so long and be so amazingly powerful if nobody ever supported it? But what has happened was that over the period, you know, the 10 years post the democratic elections in South Africa, the discourse had changed, you know, radically.
Helena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm part of my job is to be a timekeeper, and we've come to the end of our time. And I also want to let Raja make more further remarks as he's been
sure.
quiet.
I just want to say I think this can also happen with Jewish Israelis, you know.
Okay, thank you. Raja, do you want to add any closing remarks?
Not really. I listened very interestingly to the discussion, and I think we have explored some important issues. And I think that there are so many imponderables now that we have to consider, because it's a changing world and it's a changing reality. And how it will end up is for us to see in the future. I don't know more.
Well, I don't really have anything wiser than that I can say. Just I will underline again what Leila said, that trying to change the discourse a little bit from group identity and group rights to equality, and to remind people that we are talking about human beings would be very important. And I'll just end on that somewhat idealistic note. And thanks again to all of you for taking time out to speak to us. On the one hand, we could say a lot more, and on the other hand, we're not sure what to say, but we will keep on trying to do what we can. And thanks to the audience for your questions, challenges, and for tuning in. Thank you very much.